it's appropriate that during this Martin Luther King service weekend, that Martin Luther King's words are the rudder by which the gospel is preached today. Martin Luther King said, "Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase." For King, the staircases were the movement from an obscure church preacher to someone involved in a civil rights movement to a leader, to the leader. And then to continue when he was threatened and when his family was attacked. The staircase was going back to the bridge or praying in a jail cell instead of going home at night. Faith, for Dr. Martin Luther King, was a way of life. It was his calling. God's grace was with him, and his response was faith. And he dared to take the steps, not knowing where they led. There is no place in the Bible that I can name where God did not challenge God's people to take a step of faith, even when they didn't know where they were going. The path was not clear. The end was not clear and understood. But there was only grace, and then response, and then faith, or the verbal form of faith, trust. To take the first step, even when you can't see the whole staircase. There was only the promise and the call. That's abundantly clear in our lives. There is grace, and so when we fall in love, we promise ourselves in marriage. We marry with hopes and dreams, and sometimes our hopes are dashed. But what if we had never dared? We risk, we learn, we adapt, and then we risk again. There is grace, and so children are conceived. For the most part, in this day and age, we can choose to conceive a child, at least in this country. And that choice is based on grace and the faith to risk. When we take that risk, we don't know what the outcome will be. All we know is the hope and the promise. When Jesus went to the week-long marriage of a fairly close friend, he was confronted with a flight of stairs. He is challenged by his mother to dare or risk to use his grace he was given as a son. And that sign was a super abundance of wine. Wine was the drink of the day, of course, but it is also the substance and the symbol of celebration. If he risked, he had no idea where things would go. What would people say and do? Risks means he didn't know the full outcome or the big picture. But Faith is taking the first step, even when we don't see the whole staircase. In the next couple of weeks, we are going to tell the stories of Jesus taking risks. We tell the story out of order at this point in the church year. And I want to just remind you of how the story goes. Of course, I could also encourage you this week to pick up the Gospel of Mark. Very short gospel. And just sit down and read it from cover to cover. And get the chronology in your mind. Really. You know, it's a good read. It doesn't take very long, you know. So, as I said, we tell the story around this church year thing a little out of order. Jesus is baptized last week. And then he moves out to the wilderness to discern the grace and the strength to risk. And we talk about that in Lent, but that comes next. And then he reappears in the countryside and teaching by himself. He doesn't have this entourage with him. He's just going from town to town and he's teaching. And then he goes to his hometown and he risks to speak the word that he has been given at his home synagogue. Now I have to tell you, that is a big challenge. You know, my home congregation has never invited me to come back. But I would be frightened. Or I would have been frightened. People I know are kind of passed away. But to be able to speak a word to people who have raised you, who have nurtured you and cared for you, and then suddenly you're the preacher and not the kid. It's hard to go back and change positions. So he goes to his hometown and he risks to speak the word that he's been given. And at first the people are amazed. Oh, that's our boy Jesus. And then they get angered because it seems to me like he's on his high horse. And he's looking down on them. And they attack him. And they push him out of town. But, I remind you, even in the midst of that whole event, faith is taking the first step when you don't see the whole staircase. We know that Jesus passed through that crowd. And they just mumbled and grumbled, and he went on his way. And he called disciples. And then he taught, and he healed. And he did more talking and healing. And then one day he looked down on the city of Jerusalem. And he had his disciples get for him a donkey. And he rode into the city. And he cleaned the temple of merchants and money changers, people making lots of money on the religious life, the spiritual life of these people. And he was trying. And he was working. And he was crucified. And he was raised from the dead. And he came back and appeared to his disciples and to people who followed him in the places where they had met him in the first place, on the road, by the water, in the fishing boats, when we step out in faith, it doesn't mean that our hands are empty. It doesn't mean that we have nothing. When we put our hands out like this, for instance, like when we receive Holy Communion and we make a cradle of our hands for the communion bread, it's not that they actually are empty and are being filled with something, because the hands outreached like this are outreached in faith, in grace. They are, our hands are filled with the promises of God, that the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, given for us, those key words, for us. We risk coming to the table not knowing where this race is going to take us. Each experience of risk teaches us, and we adapt, and then we risk again. And this is the way of faith. Now, I think I've told you this story before, but it is one of my favorite illustrations about experience, risk, experience, adapt, risk. And it's the story of a young boy at camp who is on a high ropes course. Two trees far apart, the ropes are 10, 12 feet up, and then there's one about 5 feet below it. And the whole thing about this thing is that you're supposed to walk the tightrope from tree to tree. Well, I'm afraid of heights. So this would be very hard for me. But Tom, he climbs up the ladder for the first time, and he puts himself in a harness, and there's a hook, and there's a carabiner, and he hooks his carabiner onto that top rope. So then he has something that's supporting him. And then he looks at his camp counselor, and he says, "So am I ready?" And the camp counselor says, "You're ready when you trust the equipment." And so, in a race, I could just see myself taking one step at a time. Right there in that harness. I mean, I really can. I am such a klutz. But he takes one step, and he hasn't pulled off the rope yet. And so his mind adapts. He's learned something. I can do this. And so he takes another step, another risk. And he learns something. I can do it twice. And so he adapts his behavior, and he takes another risk. He takes 2 steps, and he's still there. He's still on the rope. He has learned something. And so he adapts his behavior, and he takes another risk. He takes 3 steps. And then he jumps. And he's still on the rope. And he has learned something amazing. And he scampers all the way to the other end of the rope. He comes to the platform, and at that point, there's another line, and zoom, down you go, and he lands on his feet, and he takes off the harness, and goes back to the line, and scampers up the ladder so that he can do it again. He has learned. He has adapted, and now he is ready for our news. And maybe sometime down the road, when he's scampering, he's going to lose his balance and he's going to get caught by that harness that's holding him. And then, you know, it's kind of like having to get back on the horse. He does that. And he's learned something new. And he will adapt. And he will risk again. And that's what the life of faith is like. Because there is grace, grace is first. We risk. And we learn. And because we learn something, we can adapt our behavior. And because we can adapt our behavior, we can risk yet again. When the Apostle Paul began his missionary journeys, he had no idea what the future was going to bring. He just had met Jesus on the road. And he had his eyes closed and then his eyes opened. And he stayed in Damascus for several years, and he learned and learned and learned about the witness of Jesus. And then he was sent out. And he did all these amazing missionary journeys. And lots of things happened to him, good and bad. He knew his grace-filled call. Grace was first. And so on his journeys, he went to Carole, a rough place, a seaport town. And he established a community of believers. But he didn't live the one apostle, one Christian community model. So he didn't just stay there. He wasn't like a settled pastor to the community. He came to that community, he trained converts to be leaders, and of course they had to risk carrying the gospel and failing or getting too full of themselves and their power. And Paul went on. And then they would send letters back to Paul, who was on the road again, and they laid out their problems. They needed answers. They needed wisdom. Now, Paul didn't know where the whole staircase was going, but he lifted up the leadership of humility, like Christ, and concern for the least among the community and the most sensitive of in the community, and that was his principle. He called on the Christian community to live in peace with each other, to use their gifts and faith to raise up the community and not tear it apart. He compared the community of Christ with a body. And who in their right mind intentionally abuses his or her body? Well, we do, but in order for Trinity to move forward and not walk backwards, Trinity has to risk in faith, to face the future, not knowing where we are going, but only knowing that God's grace is the beginning of our walk. Next week, we are having a congregational meeting to elect a slate of persons to serve as a call committee. Now, they have lots of work to do. But one of the things that they need to do is to discern what God has given to this congregation, what assets the congregation has. And at the same time, as all this is going on, our congregation is going to be in conversation with 5 other congregations in the northwest suburbs who are discerning how they are going to respond to God's grace. And that response may not be the one pastor, one congregation model. Yesterday, Chris Strayer and Rick Johnson and I went to a meeting with these other 5 congregations led by the bishop. And it was thought-provoking. It was inspiring. It was frightening. It was interesting. It was questioning. So these 2 processes that the congregation is going to be involved in will call the congregation to risk thinking about different models of ministry so that we can witness the good news of Jesus Christ. Here in the congregation, here in the building, but also out in that community. Because, my friends, I tell you, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole step. May the peace of God that passes all understanding keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.